the former senior advisor to President Ronald Reagan, President Nixon, Pat Buchanan. Patrick, good to have you. What do you make of this?
Well, let me speak as former communications director to Ronald Reagan. This is very dramatic. I think I agree with you. Sean Spicer is going to go down in history quite famously. I think he served as well as he could. And I think in some ways he's become quite famous. But I think the key thing I'm looking at, Neil, is this. Does the director of communications, is he going to be in charge of the message from the White House? And is the press secretary going to be under him? And will he be the go-between the press secretary and the president of the United States? When I was brought in by Don Reagan at the beginning of the second term, Reagan wanted me to take charge of Larry Speaks in the press secretary's office. And I said that'd be a mistake. The press secretary needs to be directly to the president, and we'll handle the other communication shop. So this is going to be interesting to see. Secondly, that while Reagan often would go off script and say what he thought, the Russians have a right to, Soviets have a right to steal, cheat, and lie in press conferences, Donald Trump does it all the time. He's his own communications director.
But Pat, I was just saying earlier with the guests, I don't know what kind of relationship you had in that capacity with Richard Nixon. You were obviously quite young, or later on with Ronald Reagan. But I always feel a press secretary, even though they're beholden to the president tells them what to say, they've got to be able to say something back like, sir, I don't think that would be a good idea. Or,
well, that's why you need
and I don't know if that's going to be Scaramucci doing that and just would tell the president, in this case, sir, I don't think so.
Well, that's exactly why. First, the press secretary needs the direct line to the president. Secondly, we used to go into the president after we had our senior staff meeting and say, here's the communications program we got today, sir. You'll be speaking in the EOB here on this issue, this issue. We want to get this message across. And often Reagan would go over to the EOB and he would say, after I'm done giving the written speech, I'm going to take some Q&A, which meant he would say what he wanted to say. And, of course, he was the president and could. But
right.
You would tell the president, I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. President.
All right. Now, I guess you're referring to the Eisenhower office building where you guys would conduct these.
Oh, yeah, the EOB.
Okay, but I'm just curious, Pat, in light of these changes, we're told that Steve Bannon, this is coming from Politico, that Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus were not a fan of the Scaramucci appointment and that they said it would happen over their dead bodies. It happened. So what do you make of that?
They're on record saying that. They're going to have to accept it. But look, you're also going to have to. Where does Kellyanne Conway stand? She's a communicator for this administration. You got Sebastian Gorka is out speaking for this administration.
Well, she was on earlier today on this network, and nothing in her demeanor, style, or answers to questions seemed to indicate that she was telegraphing this coming, unless she had a great poker face.
The question is, who controls the message coming out of the White House now? Is
Donald Trump.
Scaramucci going to be the key guy deciding that?
No, I think it's still the president. Where am I wrong?
Well, if it's a president, but who decides whether the others who are below the president can go out on television and what they should say and not say?
How did it work with Reagan and you? And you were there, and you were handling... Did you have a list of a half a dozen people who would go out and talk?
No, we would no. You scheduled and programmed people. Let me tell you, for example, if you had a Contra aid vote coming up on the Hill, we would schedule cabinet people, write speeches for them. You'd do the same thing with Nixon during campaigns, write the speeches for the cabinet officers, get them on the air. Then you'd put other people on the air, the NSC people, and then you'd schedule the president for 2 nights before the vote in the Congress, and he'd deliver the big speech, and then the legislative guy would go in and say, Mr. President, you got to call these 6 or 7 guys. It was all programmed. I mean, it was a well-oiled, well-run machine. I mean, so was Nixon's White House, extraordinarily so.
We live in different media times, as you know, Pat, and of course you have all these news networks and business networks, and they all want their administration guests and their takes. And would you, just if you had to offer advice to Scaramucci coming in, tell him limit the number of people you fan out, get them all on the same page? Because quite often I've discovered, just a cursory read of watching them, they're all over the map.
Well, this is what you need to do, I think. I would do if I were, first you're going to have to get to the president and try to get control of his message to the degree you can. Secondly, you ought to have a meeting of all the communicators who are going to go out that day and say, look, here's the message we're pushing, here's the issue. I'm sure they have tried to do this. It comes naturally, Neil. But my guess is these things break down because of the tweets and because of, you call in the New York Times and talk to them for 45 minutes.
Yeah, and no one apparently knew about that. See, that's the problem there.
That'd be a tough job for the communications director.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But again, it is what it is.
I think Scaramucci's going to have to talk directly to the president to get some. Is he going to be in control of the White House message? I mean, does that mean he's going to decide, obviously, in concert with the others, the chief of staff and the others? And are they going to send out the various people to convey the messages? Each of them does differently, but everybody's on the same page, as you say.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Pat Buchanan.